Great, so let's get started. Gerson, I want to say a big welcome. Thank you for joining us, and to those attendees, see some wonderful clients on the line and other great TA and HR leaders. We're thrilled to have you here today to learn more from Gerson. We're honored to have about his journey transforming talent acquisition at Sun Life Financial. He's going to cover a whole bunch of topics for us. I will first briefly introduce him. Gerson is an accomplished transformation leader, really believes deeply in the power of data, the power of digital solutions, thinking outside the box. I've been lucky enough to witness this firsthand in the partnership and the journey that we've been lucky enough to be on with him. He does have global TA experience and talent management strategy. So kind of that hybrid from oil and gas, hospitality, financial and insurance industries. Held several roles at progressive global talent acquisition orgs, from Scotiabank to Domino's Pizza, Anadarko, and is currently the Talent Acquisition Assistant Vice President at Sun Life. So big welcome. Thank you for joining us. And I wanted to just kick off, I think, if we can, with kind of the going back to your journey, overview of the vision and the innovation agenda for talent acquisition and talent management that you brought to Sun Life, and especially if you can touch on how you thought about your technology stack, what are the components of your stack, and what were really the key drivers to the beginning of that search.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you very much, Athena, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be today with all of you. And happy to share about our journey. We have been on quite an interesting journey transforming talent acquisition at Sun Life. So let me probably start by providing a bit of background on why a talent acquisition transformation. So I joined Sun Life about a year and a half ago. Prior to me joining, senior leaders, HR leaders in the organization had identified that a transformation was required for multiple reasons. One is that they acknowledged that there had been limited investment in talent acquisition. The team was highly transactional at that point, very reactive to requisition management, very manual process, significant inefficiencies in the process, lack of analytics, data, a data perspective. And obviously, all this created lots of complexities on the experience for the hiring manager, for the candidates, the employees. So there was that need to truly become more innovative, to do a lot of catch up in terms of best practices also in the space. So when I joined the organization, I was fortunate that the buy-in was already there on doing the transformation. And as we came together, we looked into, there is a lot of great things that we can do and say about transforming talent acquisition. But at the end of the day, it basically needs to focus on three key drivers or elements. Number one is about how do we make things simpler and faster to all our different stakeholders? And this incorporates obviously the automation of the processes, optimization, all those great things, and drives precisely the tech stack that we were going to invest on. The second component is around how do we do our work in a smarter and better way? And that obviously is aligned also to the automation, but in addition to that, it's also aligned to data analytics, and also another key element that we wanted to focus on, which was how to drive a better quality of hire in the organization. And the third one was around how do we deliver awesome experiences to all our stakeholders? This is not just about the candidate or the hiring manager, but also we want to keep into consideration the talent acquisition consultant. So those were the three key drivers that we developed as part of that strategy. And then we went into the next step, which is, okay, if that's what, those are the drivers, how are we going to get to that point? And we went over, okay, different components that we need to tackle. Number one is obviously experience. The second one is optimization and automation of processes, which aligns with digital, building a digital capabilities for talent acquisition. And the last component, which is probably the most critical one, was around building the capabilities of the talent acquisition team. Again, the team was very passionate about the work that they did, loved it, and were very effective on what they were doing at that point. But we needed to elevate those capabilities to build the superstar of the future that was going to be able to deliver on that experience and that new model. So that's in general the vision and where things were at that point. Then we started working into, okay, how do we build now what that model is going to look like? And how are we going to precisely build the technology, the talent acquisition ecosystem that is going to help us deliver along those lines? And we started putting together a model where we are a little bit challenging the existing way of working in talent acquisition. You know, talent acquisition typically is focused on, we have a need, we have a requisition, we hire, and then we move on to the next requisition. We are building a model in which we have a more cyclical approach to talent acquisition, where we are actually building that relationship at the beginning of the process in a proactive way with candidates, with the leads and with prospects, actually, not with candidates. The opportunity comes up, it becomes a requisition. We convert those leads into candidates. We manage the process, hire them ideally, but then once we hire them, we want to keep in touch with them throughout their employee experience in the organization. And we are building a model where we are also proactively sourcing that talent internally in the same way that we're doing it externally. So that we are moving precisely from being talent acquisition consultants into becoming a bit more of career coaches for that talent in a more cyclical and comprehensive way. So I'm going to stop there for a moment and see if you have some other questions, Athena.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant, and it's one of the things that you guys skipped the whole step from recruiter to talent acquisition consultant and went right to career coach, whether you're in the org, future to be in the org, passive talent we're nurturing relationships with. So the kind of end-to-end vision and the convergence, I think, of talent acquisition, talent management, passive and active candidate is one of the, I think, most exciting kind of next generation steps you all took. And to put together, I guess maybe helpful to talk even about how do you think about putting together a tech stack? What's kind of the foundational components, obviously your ATS and HCM, but to take a vision like that and break it into what's the technology, what are the processes and training, what's the automation, what's the augmentation? Can maybe talk to the group a little bit more about how you thought through that.
Yeah, that's a great question, Athena. And I think, again, it's important to have that vision, that model clearly defined. And then you move into, okay, what is that talent acquisition ecosystem going to look like? And what are the key components of that process that you need to account for? And then you need to identify what are the solutions that are going to help you deliver on that. In our case, we started or we focused on the foundational elements of that talent acquisition ecosystem. As I mentioned before, there had been very low investment in talent acquisition technologies. So when we started this journey, we started with the most foundational and fundamental aspects of that. And even some of the more transactional elements of the function. I'll give you an example. Interview scheduling, video interview assessments, those are relatively foundational elements of the experience. And also elements like, for instance, delivering a more automated experience in the hiring process. Some basic things such as electronic signatures in the offer, which again, it's so basic. or integrating your technology with your background check provider so that you can deliver a more automated experience. So we started there, and then we have expanded into the more transformational components of the area, and focusing on that tech stack at this point. So that includes, for instance, AI resume screening. It also includes focusing on some predictive assessment tools, which it's a very interesting approach that we are taking, thinking again a little bit outside the box. And then the other element is a candidate relationship management tool that is going to allow us to focus precisely on building that proactive sourcing approach to talent acquisition. So it's been a journey. It definitely doesn't happen magically. We, as you mentioned, Athena, we are trying to move from that recruiter into the career coach. I'm going to be the first one to say that we're not there yet. It's a journey. We're still going through the talent acquisition consultant stage, but we are very excited about the opportunities in the future, and also excited about building those capabilities in our team, which is a very interesting experience.
Yeah, I think something interesting maybe to share with the group is a unique experience. We see a lot of companies going through the transformations. Rarely do they bring all the vendors in their stack together and say, we don't just want you guys to tell us that you connect. We want to actually see the data flow, the user experience, the capability, the ways we're going to, as a hybrid metric, right? So the talent experience system that you're mentioning, and the HiredScore and the predictive assessment. What is that end-to-end flow? And kind of, would love to think of, how do you think about the partnership that you guys drive with that ecosystem, with those vendors, and kind of thinking even before implementation, before launch, how you make sure all those pieces connect together. I think there's a lot of good lessons learned.
Yes, that's a very good point, Athena. I cannot stress enough the importance of that talent acquisition ecosystem. And that is a framework that is obviously going to evolve as you bring in all the different technologies, but you need to consider precisely what those integration points are going to be from a data perspective, from a user navigation perspective as well. So it's a very important element. In our case, we have tried to be extremely careful about what that integration looks like, to the point that we become a little bit of a pain in the neck to our vendors, asking them lots of questions about how that integration works, because I cannot stress enough the importance of that. The last thing you want is build an ecosystem that is actually not integrated, where, in some cases you can actually deliver a good user navigation experience, but if the data is not consistently flowing across the technologies, you're going to be in trouble. And you're going to be in trouble in multiple fronts, one of which is, how are you going to measure the ROI on that experience? The second key element of that is also, how are you going to precisely look into generating further efficiencies in the process, in the integration between those technologies? So it's a very important element. I cannot stress it enough, that we need to take into consideration. In our case, we have tried to look at it before obviously signing the contract. So it's a key element of the contracting stage. And when we went through that process with you, Athena, I think you could leave it on how much of a pain we can be precisely reinforcing the importance of those elements. And typically when you're doing a vendor selection process, you cannot stay at a high level on assessing those capabilities. But I like to encourage everyone to try to do a little bit of a deeper exercise to actually understand what the implications are and identify if that is the right solution that has the right level of capabilities. Because again, otherwise you're going to be in trouble later on.
Yeah. And I think the notion of how you view that kind of Sun Life vendor partnership and the vendor commitment to the Sun Life ecosystem and reduction of cost of ownership and data flows, user experience flows is a really unique thing, kind of maybe worth, I guess, discussing with the group. how are you thinking about measuring? You know, we have a question from the audience. What's the success indicator or the early indicators of that enhanced TA or the talent consultant moving to the talent superstar?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So in our case, we have built our measures of success across three key areas. Number one is what is the impact on the experience that we are delivering? What are the improvements that we are seeing on that experience? And that is for the candidate, for the hiring manager, also for the consultant. And now we're moving into how do we see that impact across the different stages of the process, not just with the new hire. Anyways, building on that piece, the impact on that experience. The second element is around efficiencies. Time to fill, for instance, time and stages. That is a critical element. But the other one that we are building on is precisely the impact on productivity in the organization. So we are tracking quality of hire, the impact on turnover, impact on productivity. And it's a very interesting exercise as you incorporate those elements. And I'm very excited in our case that, again, because we had that focus on analytics from the beginning, we have been able to align our data, our analytics to the elements that were included in the business cases. So at this point, what we have seen is that after a year and a half of implementation of the technology and the transformation, we are seeing that we have tripled the ROI on the investment that was done, which is exciting. It's a great story to tell. In a year and a half, we can say that we have already gone beyond break even on the investment that was done. And it's very exciting to also be able to do a projection of what we expect that potentially will happen over the next couple of years. So that helps you tell the story on the impact that you're having on the transformation of talent acquisition, but also the value that your tools are delivering as part of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very powerful, the year and a half payback. And I think even where you can go from here with that connected talent acquisition, talent management, sourcing, screening, filling, I guess, how do you think about, we have a question from the audience around how do you measure quality of hire, and how do you measure kind of the key opportunities when you got started of that recruiter efficiency, recruiter effectiveness? You know, some people had asked about fetch, for example. How do you kind of put a number to what your expectations of what that can bring are?
Yeah, that's a good question. So let me start with the quality of hire. So what we have done is that we have done an implementation in terms of some solutions on some pilot areas, where we know that we can measure more effectively the impact of the solution. And then we're following an iterative approach afterwards, expanding to some other areas as we prove precisely the benefit of that. So for instance, we decided to focus in a high volume area, implement some solutions for that area, and then we are measuring the impact again on turnover, number one, and productivity, because this area has very good ways to track that productivity of that employee. And what we have been able to see is that since we implemented the solutions, we are seeing a higher impact on better productivity, better performers that are able to bring a higher productivity to the role. Very significant, around 80% of impact on that productivity. And the second element is we have seen a very significant decrease in turnover for that area. Obviously, there are many variables associated with that, and it's not just COVID. We actually implemented this more than a year and a half, a year and something, and a few more months ago. And we're able to see, as that turnover decreases, how many less individuals we're hiring into the organization, which at the end, it has a financial impact, and it allows us to precisely measure financially what that impact is. So a very exciting approach to that. Definitely, we are looking into expanding this now into some other areas. And as we do so, we're going to, I would expect to see more benefits associated with that. But again, it's thinking outside the box in a way, right? And it's ensuring that you have that data available to be able to do that proper analysis. So I know that that's the first piece of your question. What was the second? I'm sorry, I forgot.
No, I rapid fire through a lot of questions, and we're getting a whole bunch of questions coming in, which is great. That's a good sign with a virtual stage. So the second question was, TA productivity and effectiveness. What did you see kind of as the low-hanging opportunities, maybe because of the large candidate volumes you have in the ATS, soon to be pipelines you'll have with the talent community? Kind of, how did you think about the opportunities for TA efficiencies and where to start?
Yes, the first component for us was there was a lot of manual work that was happening where we could do some automation, like interview scheduling, for instance, right? So we focused on that, and it allowed us to gain efficiencies and allowed us to obviously look into the resources assigned to complete that type of work. That's number one. The second element is one of the first things that we also did is we started working on, again, that analytics, but what does those analytics mean in terms of the talent acquisition performance, talent acquisition consultant performance. So we built a talent acquisition scorecard to be able to track the impact of the transformation and the solutions that we were building, and tracking precisely those efficiencies as it relates to time in the different stages, time to source, time to present candidates to the hiring managers, time to precisely go through the interview stage. So that is obviously help us identify what the impact is that we're having at the end of the day in time to fill, but also driving further efficiencies on how that consultant conducts that work, so that it's in a more automated way and technology is actually supporting, enabling them to be more efficient.
Yeah, great. We had a question just for context setting. What's the scale of your annual hiring? How big's your TA resource pool? Kind of how do you have them allocated? People talk a lot about when you bring in this transformation and you start to see this ROI, does that mean recruiters go away? Does that mean you gain workforce now for them to do more? Kind of how do you think about where you're applying now the benefits gained also?
Mm-hmm. So in our case, there were a couple of things. And number one is, as we implemented these solutions, definitely we saw some efficiencies from a headcount perspective. We did a reallocation of resources in some cases. In the other component that we also, and I'm sorry, the question was also around providing some background on the size of the organization. So in our case, we have a team of in Canada, of about 40 recruiters. And our hiring volumes on an annual basis are around 3,000 hires being done, both internally and externally. So those are our high level numbers. And the 40 members of talent acquisition include talent acquisition consultants, as well as program managers, and so on and so forth. So I hope that provides some context. Mm-hmm. So the other part of the question, can you help me up with that? I'm sorry.
Yeah, but it was when gaining this benefit now, where and how are you applying it, right? So you have more recruiter time capacity, strategic thinking, essentially. So kind of how have you thought about bringing that to the business or to the org?
Yes, we're trying to focus on a couple of areas. Number one is sourcing, again, building that proactive sourcing approach. And the second component is on building stronger relationships with the business. That's a key element, because in our case, and we still have some pockets where we have some work to do, again, being very transactional, the focus was on give me a requisition, I'll find you some candidates and I'll present them to you. We wanted to align more towards the business strategy, building that relationship with the business leaders, being better aligned with the business strategy. So that's where we're trying to focus on more at this point.
Yeah, great. Um, a whole bunch of questions. We do have our agenda, so we're going to try to balance between the two. Um, we do have a follow-up question from the great ROI you shared, which is how quickly did it take you to start to see the impact of HiredScore on those measured KPIs? And I know HiredScore launched with another toolkit, so we kind of had two together. But
Yes, that's right. So we have seen some benefits. FHA, for instance, there have been some hires done by leveraging the fetch capability, which is great. I mean, we didn't have that before. We didn't have a way to actually identify that talent. That's number one. The second element has been in terms of efficiency in the screening stage for the recruitment consultant. And I would say that in our case, we didn't necessarily see a benefit right after the implementation. There was a bit of a learning curve where we had to go through the optimization of the job postings, for instance, the job descriptions for AI purposes, training the consultants on how to do that and how to also help us train the brain. That was a key element. But now we are seeing the benefits right there. So initially there was a bit of an increase, but then right now we have actually cut down 50% precisely that time to source, which is exciting. We're seeing that benefit very more evident. Some opportunities definitely as we train the brain. It doesn't happen magically that suddenly from one day to the next, everything is working out there and you're getting all the top candidates that you're looking for. Particularly in our case, where we have so many different type of requisitions. We have from corporate roles to high volume. There are many different type of roles. So it does require some time to build that brain. But we're very excited, even with the benefits that we see in terms of screening of those candidates, going from the basic capabilities that our applicant tracking system provided into now seeing all of those, all of that relevant information within HiredScore. And we are integrating some other tools precisely into HiredScore to be able to have a more comprehensive view.
Yep, yep. Yeah, I mean, just for the group on the line, Gerson and Sun Life are less than 1 year, I think 9 months, even sub, into the post-launch. So, you know, what I think has been exciting is more of the components that we can bring in, that predictive assessment vendor, the soon to launch talent community, and even more pools of passive talent. The fetch hires we've seen have been in experienced, even manager, high manager level role types where, you know, the more data, more candidates and prospects we have, kind of hopefully the even better surfacing we can do. So probably a good time, I think, to mention, you know, you talked about stakeholder satisfaction. Do you see a rise in satisfaction of the recruiters, of the hiring managers? People tend to think recruiters reject technology and are going to be less satisfied with their experience. Maybe talk a little bit more about that stakeholder satisfaction and how you've measured that and what your experience has been.
Yeah, that's a very good question, Athena. In our case, I think it has been a little bit mixed. There are some consultants that are a bit more curious, I would say, about technology, and they want to get their hands on it and they want to see the results. And so obviously they have been very excited about the results that we have seen so far. In some other cases, we have had to do a little bit more of coaching, training, education for some of the other consultants, particularly as we are training that brain and bringing in out a better way of developing the job postings for AI purposes. So it's been a little bit of a journey for the team, but in general, I recall when we launched a HiredScore in particular, everyone was extremely excited on moving from that very tedious approach for candidate screening into leveraging the tool. And that excitement remains there. There are, again, opportunities to train a little bit more the brain, but that I believe is part of the natural approach, particularly in our case, due to the different type of roles that we hire for. from technical roles to corporate. So in some cases, the role is very new to the brain, and obviously we need to build up that knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's one thing that I think you mentioned that's interesting, which is how an innovation agenda might sometimes accelerate the need to address other pain points that are maybe less dire before that innovation. So a great example you gave is job posts or recs, maybe not being as clearly written or contradictory, or all the qualifications not being delineated into basic versus preferred and clearly specified. So, you know, maybe even just mentioning, how do you allocate resources or even project up other things you'll need to address when pursuing these innovation plans, moving from a predictive hire assessment to maybe the old way of phone screening, and kind of how talk a little bit more, I guess, about the unplanned or unanticipated things that also arose that now you've been addressing.
Yes, that's a good point, Athena. So in our case, we try to prepare as much as possible for some key components like precisely the job postings. So we started doing some work before the implementation of the tool, but the reality is that you kind of need the tool there in action to actually be able to see the results, right? We thought we were ready, but then we realized actually there is more work that we need to do. And honestly, in our case also, there was a lot of work that we needed to do for the optimization of those job postings. Because in our case, we actually started with the hiring manager was probably doing most of the heavy lifting on those job postings, and TA was just doing a little bit, probably 10% of the work. Where now we moved into the hiring manager is providing a job description. You as a talent acquisition consultant are building a job posting. Which was a bit of a shift, obviously, for the talent acquisition consultant. And we needed to work to address that. Again, in general, we are seeing some great benefits on the tool in terms of the screening of the candidates, the efficiencies associated with that, the internal fetch capabilities. Recruiters very excited to find this great talent that they didn't know that existed, that we had in the database. They find it, and what is more exciting is as they present it to hiring managers, and hiring managers, even during the strategy intake meeting, get these great candidates and are excited that TA is actually proactively presenting them to them. So it's great to see those results and the satisfaction of the hiring manager on how TA is precisely moving along on that consulting approach, which is supported by the technology that we're using, right?
Yeah. It's a great point of how, you know, pre-AI workflows and post-AI workflows can, at the core, it's about transforming the relationship of a TA and a hiring manager, and the consultative ability, and maybe talking a little bit more about what's next. I know you're thinking a lot about continuing to break down the silo of talent acquisition and talent management so that you're finding the best talent for the role, whether that's internal or external, and kind of arming the TA superstars with internal talent views, side-by-side external talent views. I think would be great maybe to even mention how you're thinking about that next step of your journey.
Yes, I'm very excited about that next step because typically talent acquisition, it takes a very siloed approach focused on the external searches. And in terms of the internal searches, we focused on the job opportunities that actually come up as you know, as part of our requisition cycle. And what we are building now is precisely that approach where the consultant becomes a coach to facilitate that experience and looking into that talent, even that internal talent within the organization, building relationships, tapping on the shoulder, and then transfer them to another position, which opens up lots of opportunities from a change management perspective with hiring managers, with the organization in general. In our case, we're very fortunate that there is a lot of buy-in by senior executives in the organization about that new approach. So we're very excited about that. And I'm also very excited about the future of work and what that means to talent acquisition. Moving from typical internal job opportunities to actually gigs and skills and all that exciting stuff. So in our case, for instance, we implemented a gig pilot where we are leveraging a technology to broadcast these gigs, leveraging also AI technology for that. And we are seeing a very good degree of interest in employees precisely to own their career and to leverage the gigs precisely for career development purposes. So we implemented a pilot in HR initially. Now we are expanding it to some other areas. Very excited to see the high degree of interest that this is gaining in the organization, and excited to go into the next stage, which is potentially going to be that internal job opportunities may go away to a certain degree, and they are going to be replaced by gigs. So we'll see. I'm very excited about those possibilities.
Yeah, well, I think the vision of how from the ATS, the HCM, the LMS, the VMS, which people don't even think about, but that's an unlocker to external contingent, and how all of that can be connected. And when that flows and is augmenting the human sitting at the middle of this, what kind of superpowers that gives them, right? So also very excited to see that. I think, you mentioned culture and you mentioned change. Maybe you can mention when you're implementing all these new things, how did you approach that internal Sun Life culture shift and culture change? Did you do internal marketing? Did you have your senior champions and they were the voice of the microphone championing it? Can maybe talk a little bit more about that? It's pretty transformational.
So as it relates to the talent acquisition transformation, we focus more on the talent acquisition consultants and the HR stakeholders as part of that. And then in the case of the hiring manager, we actually decided to take a just-in-time type of approach. We didn't need to broadcast to the organization the changes that were happening. We decided to address them as a hiring manager would come in through the process. Now, when it comes to this big shift in terms of the internal talent scouting, we're again going through that journey. And this morning I was actually reviewing the change management plan precisely for that initiative. What we are planning on doing is tackling it across the different segments, obviously business leaders, the hiring managers, the TA consultants, the employees, and the other key one is HR. Because what we find that in these type of circumstances is that typically HR tends to be a bit of a skeptic about these changes. So we gotta ensure that we get that buy-in early on and that they become those change champions on the initiatives as we move along. So very excited about that. At the business leader level, senior business leader level, there is a lot of buy-in again, but I think that as we start working on the details of what this actually means, and that, for instance, I'm actually going to tap on somebody's shoulder to offer this opportunity, that may generate all type of interesting conversations and reactions. So again, we're getting started on the journey. I hope that I'll have more to share with you at some point in the future about how that journey takes place.
And Gerson, we got a question, anticipatory question from the crowd on internal fetch. And do you see pushback from the business in supporting that internal career development in a proactive way, being kind of probed by a TA function? I know you're early on in that journey, and kind of anything else you can share, or I'll connect you with whom asked that question and you guys can share notes on how TA drives talent management internally as well.
Yes, definitely. Well, I am very excited about the possibilities of internal fetch. I think that it's the next way to go. We need to have that tool. Otherwise, you're not able to action precisely on the identification of that internal talent. And in my case, I'm also thinking about how we link internal fetch with CRM so that it allows us to precisely build those pipelines of talent, internal pipelines of talent that then you can reach out to. So very excited about those possibilities. I think that in our case, so far what I've seen is, again, lots of buy-in from senior leadership about this new philosophy, this new approach. But again, we're getting started in this journey. I think that we'll have some interesting reactions, particularly from managers, as we start executing on this. We'll have some interesting reactions also from HR on the same page. So it will be an interesting journey, and I'm not naive. I think that there is going to be a degree of resistance, but I think that what we need to ensure is that we have the proper process and procedure in place on how we are going to engage this talent, so that it doesn't necessarily come with a high degree of surprise to that manager. There is already a culture that we're building, and as we do the reach out, they can relate to that culture building that is taking place. In our case, we're also fortunate that we are going through a big organizational transformation, moving into a digital organization. So there is a digital transformation in place. And one of the key components of that digital transformation is precisely the reskilling and redeployment of employees. So it's closely aligned with that strategy. And it is also, it is precisely helping us open up those channels and that big opportunity of actually do all these exciting things with the business.
Yeah, I think it's exciting how you all were able to bring together things that are happening anyway and kind of accelerate and move roadmap items, right? With maybe COVID and just generally a digitization that started saying, well, that's a good opportunity to latch on the internal mobility and talent management initiatives, and meaning managers are hearing it from all sides, right?
Definitely. COVID, in a way, generated some additional traction for all of this, that focus on internal mobility. But in our case, we're fortunate that we were already on that path even before COVID hit. So what COVID has done is that it has made it more evident that it is actually possible to move on that direction.
Yeah, exciting. So, you know, we've got a few minutes left. I wanted to just, you know, your vision for the future of the recruiter, the future of the talent acquisition function. Do you see a continuity of, you know, you mentioned internal, external, permanent, flex? Is it just about finding the skills for the future, the talent for the future? How do you articulate to your recruiters what you see as their future?
Yes, that's a good point. In our case, what we, as I mentioned before, elevating TA capability was a key element of the strategy. So one of the things that we focused on early on is clarifying to them what the expectations were and what are the capabilities that we want them to develop. So there has been a big initiative around that. We decided to focus on 6 elements. One is being that talent advisor, that coach. The second one is being that talent scout internally and externally, being a labor market master, being a business owner as well. And being a business owner means understanding their business, the business that they support, but also owning the TA experience, what they are delivering. That's a key element. The other piece aligned with the digital transformation is being tech curious, being innovative in that space and leveraging the technologies that we have, but also being curious about what else is happening out there. And the other capability was being that storyteller and that influencer on selling the organization, selling the opportunities, and all that exciting stuff. Definitely clarifying that and building training opportunities for the team has been an exciting journey. Definitely there is more work to do with them. And we also focused on the analytics side with clarifying the performance objectives, the talent acquisition scorecard, the benchmarks, clarifying those expectations to them aligned to the model that we're building. And that was important because there was a degree of uncertainty at a time when we were going through executing on the existing model, but also talking about a future model without them understanding how is it that they could get to that point. And it's been a journey, and definitely doesn't happen magically. Lots of change management, lots of coaching support for the team, and also for the managers on walking through this journey and being able to provide the right level of support and coaching to them as part of this new model.
Amazing. Yeah. So last question, inspiring round for you. What's your best piece of advice for fellow HRTA leaders driving transformations, components of what you mentioned, their own versions that you wish you knew getting started?
I would say that number one is never underestimate change management, obviously, in a transformation. Particularly support your TA management team. Make sure that that vision, that new model, that new strategy is very clear to them, that they buy into it so that they can become those change champions with the rest of the team. That's number one. The second one is don't underestimate the importance of analytics and analytics across all the different areas. What that means is, how does the data flow from one system to another? How do you track the ROI on the solutions that are being built? And how do you take action on those analytics that are coming up? The other key element is, as you select your talent acquisition tech stack, really look for innovative partners. That's a key element. And I think in our case, we didn't necessarily start with this approach, but we kind of realized about it along the way. In our case, we have selected some smaller vendors that are highly innovative, and they are leaders in their space, but they are not these humongous organizations where actually becomes very difficult to try to influence them, to try to align from a strategy perspective, to try to build some solutions and being able to influence that product roadmap. I think that's extremely important. In our case, I can tell you, for instance, last week, I met with two of the CEOs of some of the technology vendors that we have, talking about strategy, solutions, all those type of things. I cannot do that as easily as with one of the larger vendors that we have in our technology stack. So it's important to keep that in mind. Be very careful about who the partner is that you're going to be working with. Focus on the innovation, but focus on how much or how important your account is going to be to them, but also ensure that obviously that vendor is ready to be able to address elements like privacy, compliance, network security, all those fundamental and basic stuff, right?
Yep. French and English when supporting
yes, global, scalable,
everything else.
sustainable, all those important things, right?
Exactly. And then just my last question in closing is, what's most pressing? What do you feel is the most pressing challenge that's critical to focus on going forward from where you sit as a transformational talent leader?
I could say a lot of things, but I'm going to focus on technology because that's a bit of the focus of this conversation. I think that a great opportunity from a technology perspective is, again, ensuring that integration between the technology solutions is definitely strong. That is fundamental. Today, you're going to find lots of flashy solutions, very exciting, but they don't have that backbone. And you have to ensure that is there, that is critical, that you do your homework in that area. And be very careful about it, because otherwise you're going to bring in a technology that is just going to create disruption in your talent acquisition ecosystem.
Amazing. Gerson, such a pleasure. For those on the line that want to get in touch with you, maybe learn more about your journey, your vision, what's next, your stack, whatever you can share. LinkedIn, is that a good way to reach you?
Absolutely. Feel free to reach out to me. Happy to share more about our journey, but also hear about your journey. You know, at the end of the day, we're facing the same challenges. We're going potentially through similar transformations or similar opportunities in our areas. So happy to share more about it. Happy to learn from each other. So feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Gerson, and thank you everyone who joined. Wishing everyone a wonderful Tuesday.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.